The sound of a single gunshot echoed through the dusty valley of Copper Creek as Grace Payton watched the last shovelful of dirt fall onto her husband's grave. April 1878 had brought nothing but misfortune to her doorstep, and now she stood alone at the edge of what had once been their homestead, 50 acres of land that no longer belonged to her. "My condolences, Mrs. Payton," the banker, Mr. Hargrove, said without a hint of sincerity as he approached, his expensive suit collecting dust from the prairie winds. "I'm afraid I must discuss the matter of your husband's debts." Grace clutched her black shawl tighter around her shoulders, her 26 years feeling like 60 in that moment. "Can it not wait until the soil has settled on his grave, Mr. Hargrove?" The banker cleared his throat. "I'm afraid not. Your husband's gambling debts exceed the value of this property. The bank will be taking ownership effective immediately." "But this is my home," Grace protested, her green eyes flashing with anger beneath her grief. "Surely there must be something left for me." Mr. Hargrove handed her an official-looking document. "I'm sorry to say, he left you nothing." The wind carried the cruel words across the barren fields that had once promised so much. Grace felt her knees weaken, but pride kept her standing. 3 years of marriage to Daniel Payton had left her with calloused hands and broken dreams, and now, not even a roof over her head. As the banker walked away, leaving her alone with the fresh grave and her misery, Grace noticed a lone rider approaching from the east. The setting sun silhouetted his figure, casting long shadows across the plains. She watched warily as the stranger drew closer, his broad shoulders and the distinctive shape of his cowboy hat marking him as one of the many drifters that passed through these parts. The rider slowed his chestnut stallion as he reached the edge of what had been her property. He removed his hat, revealing tousled dark hair and a face weathered by sun and wind, though he couldn't have been more than 30. "Madam," he said, his voice deep but gentle, "I don't mean to intrude on your grief." Grace wiped away a tear with the back of her hand. "There's nothing left to intrude upon, sir. This land isn't mine anymore." The stranger dismounted, keeping a respectful distance. "Name's Xavier O'Malley. I was passing through when I heard about the trouble out this way." Grace lifted her chin, defiance masking her desperation. "What trouble would that be, Mr. O'Malley? My husband's death, his gambling, or the fact that he left me nothing?" Xavier's blue eyes, clear as the Wyoming sky, studied her face with unexpected kindness. "All of it, I reckon." He glanced at the fresh grave, then back to her. "If he left you nothing, then perhaps you might consider taking my everything." Grace blinked, certain she had misheard. "I beg your pardon? I need a partner, Mrs. Payton," Xavier explained, his hand resting on his saddle horn. "I've got land about 2 days' ride north of here. Good land with water rights and a small herd starting. What I don't have is someone who knows how to make a house into a home." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I'm not proposing marriage, madam. Just a business arrangement. You'd have your own cabin, a share in the profits, and time to figure out what you want to do next." Grace stared at him, suspicious of such an offer from a stranger. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Xavier replaced his hat, adjusting it against the setting sun. "My mother was widowed young. No one stepped up then. Sometimes the world needs people willing to do what's right, even when there's nothing in it for them." As the light faded from the sky, Grace faced an impossible choice: trust this stranger or face destitution in a town that had already started whispering about poor Grace Payton. "I'll need until morning to decide," she finally said, her voice steadier than she felt. Xavier nodded. "I'll be at the Copper Creek Inn. Whatever you decide, I wish you well, Mrs. Payton." As he mounted his horse and rode toward town, Grace turned back to her husband's grave. "What choice have you left me, Daniel?" she whispered to the wind. Dawn arrived with no answers but a certainty that staying would only lead to ruin. Grace packed what little remained truly hers, her mother's silver hairbrush, a few dresses, and the quilts she had sewn with her own hands. The wedding band she left on Daniel's grave marker, a final goodbye to broken promises. She walked the 3 miles to town, her carpet bag heavy in her hand. The morning sun had barely risen when she spotted Xavier outside the inn, already saddling his horse. He didn't seem surprised to see her. "I accept your offer, Mr. O'Malley," Grace said, her voice betraying none of the trepidation she felt. "But I want terms in writing. I won't be at the mercy of a man's whims ever again." Xavier's expression remained serious as he nodded. "Fair enough. We'll visit Judge Wilson before we leave. He can draw up a contract we both agree on." 2 hours later, with a legal document securing her right to independent living quarters and 1/3 share of the ranch's profits, Grace found herself riding beside Xavier O'Malley, heading north out of the only town she'd ever called home. "Have you always been in Wyoming territory, Mrs. Payton?" Xavier asked as they established a steady pace across the open plains. "Grace," she corrected. "If we're to be business partners, you might as well use my given name. And yes, born and raised in Copper Creek. My father was one of the first settlers." She adjusted her hat against the sun. "And you, Mr. O'Malley?" "Xavier, please," he replied with a slight smile. "I was born in Boston, but my family came west when I was 10. Lost my father to typhoid in '63, and my mother struggled to keep us fed. I left home at 16 to make my own way." Grace studied him from the corner of her eye. "And that way led you to ranching?" "Eventually." Something in his tone suggested there was more to the story, but he didn't elaborate. "Worked as a trail hand, did some scouting for the army, saved every penny. Bought my spread 2 years ago." They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats punctuating the vastness around them. By midday, they stopped near a creek to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. "How far to your ranch?" Grace asked, dipping her bandana in the cool water and pressing it to her face. "We'll make camp tonight about halfway there," Xavier replied, checking his pocket watch. "Should reach Willow Creek Ranch by tomorrow evening." As they continued their journey, Grace found herself studying her traveling companion. Xavier O'Malley was not what she had expected. He was educated, speaking with minimal frontier slang. His hands, while callous from work, showed a gentleness when handling his horse. Most surprising was his respect for her space and silence, never pressing her to talk when she fell quiet with her thoughts. That night, he built a small fire and insisted she take the only bedroll while he kept watch. Grace protested but eventually relented, exhaustion from grief and travel overtaking her pride. "Why did you really offer to help me?" Grace asked as she settled near the fire, the stars wheeling overhead in the vast Wyoming sky. Xavier poked at the embers with a stick, his face half illuminated in the flickering light. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Grace. Some folks never get one." She sensed there was more to his story, but fatigue pulled her toward sleep before she could ask anything else. Grace awoke to the smell of coffee. Xavier had already rekindled the fire, and was frying bacon in a small pan. He handed her a tin cup of strong, black coffee without comment. "Thank you," she said, more grateful than she wanted to admit. They ate quickly, packed up, and continued north. As the day progressed, the landscape began to change, the flat plains giving way to gentle rolling hills dotted with cottonwoods. "We're getting close," Xavier said late in the afternoon. "Willow Creek runs through that valley ahead." Grace shielded her eyes from the sun, taking in the vista before her. The valley was a verdant slash of green against the browns and golds of the surrounding prairie. A small creek meandered through its center, bordered by willows that gave the property its name. As they crested the final hill, she could see a cabin with a separate barn and corral. It wasn't grand, but it was solidly built, with smoke curling from the chimney. "Someone's there," Grace noted with surprise. Xavier nodded. "That would be Henry Gilmore. He helps with the stock when I'm away." They rode into the yard, where an older man with a silver-streaked beard emerged from the barn. He waved in greeting. "'Bout time you got back, Xavier," he called. "Calving started early this year." Xavier dismounted, helping Grace down from her horse. "Henry, this is Mrs. Grace Payton. She'll be my business partner going forward." Henry's bushy eyebrows rose slightly, but he touched the brim of his hat respectfully. "Madam, welcome to Willow Creek." "Thank you, Mr. Gilmore," Grace replied, straightening her travel-wrinkled skirts. "Your cabin's just beyond those trees," Xavier told her, pointing to a stand of cottonwoods about 100 yards from the main house. "It's not much, but it's solid. Built it last year as a place for hands to stay during roundup." Henry looked between them, curiosity evident, but he asked no questions. "I've got stew on. Enough for 3 if you're hungry." Grace followed Xavier to the smaller cabin, carrying her carpet bag. The structure was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, and a chest for storage. A small window let in the afternoon light, offering a view of the creek. "It's better than I expected," she admitted, setting down her bag. Xavier stood awkwardly by the door. "I'll give you time to settle in. Dinner in an hour at the main cabin?" Grace nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. When the door closed behind him, she sank onto the bed, letting out a long, shaky breath. She was miles from everything familiar, dependent on the goodwill of a man she'd known for barely 2 days. Yet something about Xavier O'Malley's straightforward manner and clear eyes made her want to believe in his good intentions. That evening, over Henry's surprisingly tasty stew, Xavier outlined his plans for the ranch. He had 20 head of cattle, 5 horses, and hopes to expand once the spring calves were strong enough. "I could use help with the accounts," he told Grace. "And if you're willing, the garden needs tending. Previous owner left it fallow." Grace considered this. "I can keep books and grow vegetables. My mother taught me both." Henry, watching their exchange with interest, spoke up. "Ranch this size needs a woman's touch. Been telling Xavier that since he bought the place." Xavier shot the older man a warning look. "Mrs. Payton is here as a business partner, Henry. Nothing more." Of course," Henry replied, but he winked at Grace when Xavier looked away. The next morning, Grace awoke to the sound of unfamiliar birds. She dressed quickly and stepped outside to find the valley bathed in golden light. The beauty of it caught her by surprise, a stark contrast to the dusty, worked-out land Daniel had gambled away. Xavier was already at work in the corral, breaking a young horse. Grace watched for a moment, impressed by his patience and skill. When the horse finally accepted the saddle without bucking, Xavier glanced up and noticed her. "Good morning," he called, leading the horse to the fence. "Sleep well?" "Well enough," she replied, approaching cautiously. The horse snorted, eyeing her nervously. "He's beautiful." Xavier corrected. "This one's special. Born last spring. I'm calling her Chance." Grace smiled, her first genuine smile since Daniel's death. "A fitting name." Over the next few weeks, Grace established herself at Willow Creek Ranch. She cleared the garden plot, planted seeds she'd purchased from the general store during their one trip into the nearest town, and took over the account books. To her surprise, Xavier's finances were in good order, his debts minimal and manageable. May brought wildflowers to the valley and a routine that Grace found comforting. She rose early, tended the garden, helped with the lighter ranch chores, and prepared the evening meal which they all shared in the main cabin. One evening, as they sat on Xavier's porch watching the sunset, Grace found herself telling him about her marriage. "Daniel wasn't always a gambler," she said quietly. "When we married, he had dreams of building something lasting. But after the second crop failed, something changed in him. He started going to town more often, coming home drunk." She twisted her hands in her lap. "By the end, I barely knew him." Xavier was silent for a long moment. "My father was the same," he finally said. "Not with gambling, but with dreams too big for reality. My mother paid the price for his ambitions." Grace looked at him curiously. "Is she still alive, your mother?" "No," he replied, his voice soft with old grief. "She died when I was 17, working herself to exhaustion trying to keep food on our table." His jaw tightened. "That's why I'm careful with this place. I won't reach beyond my means. In that moment, Grace understood him better, his caution, his self-sufficiency, his unexpected kindness to a woman left with nothing. As spring turned to summer, the garden flourished, and the calves grew strong. Grace found herself looking forward to the evenings when she and Xavier would sit together, talking or sometimes just existing in comfortable silence. On a particularly hot day in July, Grace was hanging laundry when she noticed a cloud of dust on the horizon. Visitors were rare, and she hurried to the main cabin to alert Xavier. "Riders coming," she said, finding him at his desk reviewing cattle prices. He rose immediately, reaching for his gun belt. "Stay inside. Could be nothing, but best to be cautious." Grace watched from the window as Xavier and Henry positioned themselves near the corral, hands near their weapons. 3 riders appeared, approaching at a leisurely pace that suggested they weren't in any hurry. "I know that lead rider," Xavier said grimly, his hand moving away from his gun. "Thomas Blackburn. Owns the big spread to the east." The men rode into the yard, and the leader, a portly man with an elaborate mustache, dismounted with surprising agility. "O'Malley!" he boomed. "Thought it was time I introduced myself properly. Been meaning to ride over since you bought this place." Xavier's posture remained wary. "Mr. Blackburn, what brings you to Willow Creek?" Blackburn's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just being neighborly. And I wanted to discuss water rights. That creek you're named after starts on my property, you know." Grace stepped onto the porch, drawing the visitor's attention. Blackburn removed his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "Well now, I didn't know O'Malley had a wife. Mrs. Payton is my business partner," Xavier corrected firmly. Blackburn's eyebrows rose. "Is that what they're calling it these days?" he said with a laugh that his companions echoed. Grace felt her cheeks flush with anger. "Mr. Blackburn, if you have business with Mr. O'Malley, perhaps you could state it plainly without crude insinuations." The rancher looked taken aback for a moment before recovering his bluster. "Feisty one, isn't she? All right then, plainly, I want to buy this parcel. It's a logical addition to my holdings. I'll pay fair market value." Xavier crossed his arms. "Not interested in selling." Blackburn's affable manner slipped. "You might want to reconsider. Small operations like yours have a way of running into trouble. Cattle rustlers, mysterious fires, all sorts of bad luck." The threat hung in the air like gunsmoke. Xavier stepped forward, his voice dropping dangerously. "Is that so? Well, I've had my share of bad luck already, Blackburn. I'm still standing." The 2 men locked eyes in a silent battle of wills until Blackburn finally looked away, forcing a laugh. "Just something to think about, O'Malley. My offer stands." He tipped his hat to Grace. "Madam." As the riders departed, Grace felt a chill despite the summer heat. "Will he cause trouble?" Xavier watched the dust cloud disappear over the hill. "Most likely. Men like Blackburn are used to getting their way." That night, Xavier insisted that Henry sleep in the barn with a loaded shotgun. He himself took the first watch, sitting on his porch with a rifle across his knees. Grace brought him coffee near midnight. "You should get some rest," she said, sitting beside him. "I'll be fine," he assured her, accepting the cup gratefully. She studied his profile in the moonlight. "You really won't sell, will you? Even with the threat of trouble?" Xavier turned to look at her, his expression serious. "This land is everything I've worked for, Grace. It's not just property to me. It's a promise I made to myself to build something honest and lasting." The intensity in his eyes stirred something in Grace she thought had died with her hopes for her marriage. She realized with startling clarity that she had begun to care deeply for this quiet, determined man. "Then we'll defend it together," she said softly. "After all, I own a third of it now." Xavier smiled, the rare expression transforming his face. "Yes, you do." The expected trouble came 3 days later when 2 of their calves were found dead near the creek boundary, their throats cut. Xavier's face was grim as he examined the scene. "This is just the beginning," he told Grace and Henry. "Blackburn's sending a message. We should report this to the sheriff," Grace insisted. Xavier shook his head. "Sheriff's in Blackburn's pocket. We're on our own." That night, they established a rotating watch. When it was Grace's turn, Xavier handed her a revolver. "Do you know how to use this?" She took the weapon, its weight unfamiliar but not unwelcome. "My father taught me. I haven't fired one in years, though." Xavier nodded. "Just remember, aim low. The gun pulls up when it fires." For the next week, they lived in a state of tense vigilance. Nothing happened, which somehow made the waiting worse. Grace found herself jumping at shadows and sleeping poorly. Then came the night when she was awakened by the smell of smoke. She rushed outside to find the barn ablaze, flames leaping into the night sky. Xavier and Henry were already working frantically to free the horses and cattle trapped inside. Without hesitation, Grace grabbed buckets and began ferrying water from the creek. The animals stampeded from the burning building, wild-eyed with panic. As dawn broke, they surveyed the damage. The barn was a total loss, but miraculously, all the animals had been saved. Xavier's face was streaked with soot and determination as he turned to Grace and Henry. "This ends now." Before either could respond, the sound of approaching horses made them turn. Thomas Blackburn rode at the head of a group of 6 men, all armed. "Terrible shame about your barn, O'Malley," Blackburn called, making no attempt to hide his satisfaction. "Perhaps now you'll see reason about selling." Xavier stepped forward, his hand hovering near his gun. "Get off my land, Blackburn." The larger man laughed. "Or what? You'll take on all of us?" He gestured to his men. "Be sensible. Sign the papers I've brought, take the money, and move on. Nobody needs to get hurt." Grace moved to stand beside Xavier, the revolver he'd given her hidden in the folds of her skirt. "This is our home, Mr. Blackburn. We're not leaving." Blackburn's expression hardened. "It's a shame. I was hoping to avoid unpleasantness." He signaled to his men. "Burn the house. If they resist, shoot them." What happened next unfolded with the surreal clarity of a nightmare. 2 of Blackburn's men dismounted and started toward the cabin with torches. Xavier drew his gun, firing a warning shot into the air. "Next one won't miss," he warned. Blackburn pulled his own pistol, aiming it squarely at Xavier. "You're outnumbered, fool!" A rifle shot cracked the morning air, making everyone freeze. Henry stood on the porch of the main cabin, rifle raised. "Not as outnumbered as you think," the old man called. The standoff might have escalated into bloodshed if not for the unexpected arrival of more riders, a dozen men from neighboring small ranches, led by Sheriff Jenkins himself. "What's going on here, Blackburn?" the sheriff demanded, reining in his horse between the 2 groups. Blackburn lowered his gun slowly, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Just having a discussion about property lines, Sheriff. Nothing that concerns you." Sheriff Jenkins surveyed the smoldering ruins of the barn with a skeptical eye. "Looks like more than a discussion to me." He turned to Xavier. "O'Malley, you want to press charges for arson?" Xavier glanced at Blackburn and his men, then back to the sheriff. "I've got no proof who started the fire, Sheriff. But I'd appreciate if you'd escort Mr. Blackburn and his men off my property." The sheriff nodded, understanding the unspoken message. "Blackburn, you and your boys are leaving." "Now." Blackburn's face contorted with rage. "This isn't over, O'Malley." As the unwelcome visitors departed under the sheriff's watchful eye, one of the neighboring ranchers, a lean man named Peterson, approached Xavier. "Word got around about Blackburn's threats," he explained. "Small operators like us have to stick together, or the big spreads will swallow us all." Grace watched in amazement as the neighbors offered help rebuilding the barn. Within hours, plans were made for a barn raising the following week, with everyone contributing lumber and labor. That evening, exhausted but relieved, Grace and Xavier sat together on the steps of his cabin. The summer stars shimmered overhead, seemingly brighter after the day's events. "You could have been killed," Grace said softly, the fear she'd suppressed during the confrontation finally surfacing. Xavier looked at her, something unreadable in his eyes. So could you? You didn't have to stand with me against Blackburn. Yes, I did. She met his gaze steadily. This is my home now, too. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning neither had yet acknowledged aloud. Xavier reached out slowly, taking her hand in his. His palm was warm, callous from work, gentle in its strength. When I offered you everything I had, I never expected to gain so much in return. Grace felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness but from the unexpected fullness in her heart. I thought Daniel left me with nothing, she whispered. But if he hadn't, I would never have found my way here. To you. Xavier's other hand rose to gently touch her cheek. Grace, he said, her name a question and an answer both. She leaned into his touch, the last barriers around her heart falling away. Yes. Their first kiss was tentative, a beginning rather than a culmination. When they drew apart, Xavier smiled with a boyish shyness that made him look younger than his years. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, he said earnestly. We can take this slow. Grace shook her head, surprising herself with her certainty. I think we already have taken it slow. Living side by side, building this place together. She squeezed his hand. I know who you are, Xavier O'Malley. You're a man of your word, with a good heart and strong hands. That's all I need to know. The barn raising brought the surrounding community together in a way Grace hadn't experienced since her childhood. Women prepared food while men raised the framework of the new structure. Children ran about underfoot, turning the workday into something resembling a festival. Grace found herself at the center of curious but friendly attention from the neighboring women, who had heard various versions of her arrival at Willow Creek Ranch. So you just packed up and came with him, not knowing what to expect? Asked Mrs. Peterson, as they kneaded dough for the midday meal. I had nothing left to lose, Grace replied honestly, and a contract guaranteeing my independence if things didn't work out. The older woman chuckled. Smart girl. Though from the way that man looks at you, I'd say things are working out just fine. Grace felt herself blush but didn't deny it. Across the yard, Xavier was directing the placement of roof beams, his shirt sleeves rolled up, hat pushed back on his head. As if sensing her gaze, he looked over and smiled, a private expression meant only for her. By sunset, the new barn stood complete, larger and sturdier than the original. The neighbors departed with promises of future gatherings, leaving Willow Creek Ranch peaceful once more. That night Xavier walked Grace to her cabin door, as had become their custom. But instead of the usual goodnight, he took both her hands in his. Grace Payton, these past months with you have shown me what it means to truly share a life with someone. His voice was steady, but she could feel a slight tremor in his hands. I know it's soon, perhaps too soon after your loss, but I can't imagine this place or my future without you in it. Grace felt her heart quicken. Xavier, I'm asking if you'll marry me, he continued, the words tumbling out now. Not because it's convenient or practical, though it is both those things, but because I've come to love you. Deeply and completely. The declaration hung in the night air between them, honest and unadorned as the man himself. Grace felt tears well in her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. When Daniel died, I thought my chance for happiness died with him, she said softly. I was wrong. You offered me everything when I had nothing, expecting nothing in return. She raised one hand to touch his face, feeling the day's stubble beneath her fingers. Yes, Xavier O'Malley. I will marry you. They were wed in October 1878, as the cottonwoods along Willow Creek turned gold and crimson. The ceremony took place on their land, with Henry Gilmore standing proudly as Xavier's best man and Mrs. Peterson as Grace's matron of honor. The small church in town had offered to host, but both preferred to make their vows where they had found each other. Sheriff Jenkins, who had become a regular visitor and friend since the confrontation with Blackburn, performed the ceremony. Thomas Blackburn had retreated to his own lands after discovering that his influence couldn't overcome the united front of the smaller ranchers. There were still occasional tensions along the borders, but open hostility had ceased. As winter settled over Willow Creek Ranch, the newly married couple found joy in simple pleasures, evenings by the fire, planning for spring plantings, and the quiet certainty of having found where they belonged. On Christmas Eve, with snow blanketing the valley in pristine white, Grace presented Xavier with news that made his face light up brighter than their modest tree. "A baby?" he whispered, placing a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "Are you certain?" Grace nodded, covering his hand with her own. "Due in summer. Our first harvest of a different kind." Xavier pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of precious glass. "From nothing to everything," he murmured against her hair. "That's what you've given me, Grace O'Malley." She smiled at her new name, still strange but increasingly right. "And you've given me a home, a purpose, and a love I never thought to find again. I'd say we're even." Outside, snow continued to fall on Willow Creek Ranch, covering all traces of the struggles that had brought them together. Inside, the warmth of their embrace promised a future neither could have imagined in the dusty aftermath of loss, a future built on the foundation of having nothing, yet offering everything.